Yo, what is up, YouTube? So today we're going to be talking about, as you can see in the title, we'll be talking about duality and why duality does not exist. So basically, just to simplify this, it's going to be a discussion about opposites and why opposites don't exist in this reality, in this realm that we live in. So I have a couple examples here, but the biggest one is going to be the concept of good versus evil, right? So I'm just gonna plainly say this: why good versus evil doesn't exist is because what is the standard for good in each society or bad in each society is not objective, or it's not a standard that's set for all societies, right? All societies have different ideologies and values on different things for different amounts of, they have different amounts of value, right? Depending on which society you live in and what you value most in your society, right? So good versus bad doesn't exist because there's always a there's always a different variable or like variation in these the value that is placed on what is good or bad in a society. I'm trying to think of an example, but for example, maybe in a society this is going to be kind of an extreme example, but maybe in the society in a Middle Eastern country, listening to a lot of music and dancing and eating pork is deemed or seen as something that's very negative, right? Because typically Middle Eastern countries value Islam, and Islam teaches that those are bad things, right? Whereas if you look at somewhere in the Western country, we don't ever consider eating pork as something that we shouldn't do, really, unless if you kind of have maybe more of a Jewish upbringing, but I wouldn't necessarily call that a Western country, right? So like the United States, I can speak more on that because that's where I'm from. We don't care about that type of stuff. And then thinking that dancing or listening to music is going to be halal, or however you say it, is going to be like a bad thing, that would never come across our minds, right? So yeah, this is why good and bad doesn't exist, because there's no, it's all basically I mean, you could go back to like morals and stuff like that too if you want to just look at it from like the baseline. Morals don't exist also because they're man-made concepts. So if you're looking at it just from a natural perspective, like there's no animal that views a certain action as good or bad, unless if you want to talk about good or bad from what is natural and unnatural, right? So it's natural for all living things to want to reproduce, right? So that would be a good thing. Reproduction is a good thing, right? Whereas not reproducing is a bad thing, because then you're not carrying on your genes to the future generations, right? So that's kind of the first example. Very, like I said, baseline, direct. And then I also have a couple examples that people use for like other arguments, or, well, what does it really say in favor of duality, but a lot of things that people point to that are opposites, for example, are going to be like man versus woman, right? So if you critically think about this, well, you didn't really have to critically think, in my opinion, that much about this, but to understand that obviously men and women are not opposites of each other. They're actually complementary. They're like complementary, I don't even know what you would call it, but entities or pieces or things, right? They're complementary to one another. They're not opposites. So men and women actually have a lot more in common than people maybe would first on the surface level thinking, which is, like, in my opinion, pretty much not thinking at all, because they're both human beings. They both have the same desires, want to be loved, want to reproduce, want to eat, thrive, survive, things like this, like other animals and living things. So they're clearly not opposites, because they're also part of the same species, right? But one big one and one good one, so I'll kind of give you guys like a really good example that you can deeply think about here in the middle of the video is, so think about this. What is the opposite of everything? So like everything around you, allness, everything encompassing this whole reality, that's going to be everything, right? So what's the opposite of everything? Well, the opposite of everything, you would think off the top of your head, would be nothingness, right? It would be absolutely nothing. But can you really even imagine that? Because what would nothingness even look like, right? And my point here being is that you can't have this concept of nothingness because it doesn't, for one, it doesn't exist in this reality, because there's nowhere that you would be able to go that would have nothingness, because you're always in this reality, which is somethingness, right? So based on this alone, you can also, even though this is kind of like a deeper topic and something that's going to require a fair amount more critical thinking, as opposed to the other examples that I'll be using, but when you think about this, can you even picture nothingness? Like when I picture what nothingness is, which is probably just something that's been planted into my head from movies and such like that, when they're in like an empty room, would be like, basically, I don't know if they did this in the Matrix, but they had like a room that they were in at the Matrix, but it would basically be you standing in probably just a huge white room, it'd be a white space, right? Like there would just be nothing. But even then, in order for you to experience that and understand that, there would still have to be oxygen, right, for you to be able to breathe and exist there. But then it would also be you in that nothingness. So it technically wouldn't be nothingness, because there would be you and oxygen and there within that said nothingness, right? So there still wouldn't be nothingness, because in order for you to experience that nothingness, you would have to exist within that nothingness, which would then make the nothingness have something, right? So, but even just like looking at the concept of nothingness, you would think it would be like a plain white room or blank slate room with like, in quote, nothingness, but then there would still be the color white also, right? Like how would that even, and how would you even determine that nothingness would be like a blank slate white room? So I know I'm kind of going on and rambling on and on about this, but just want to kind of break it down more for you guys to like truly have you guys understand that these concepts don't really make sense, like with the duality, right? Also you have the rich versus the poor. The opposite of being rich is poor, but for one, money doesn't exist, so it's not even like a real concept, right? But the difference between a rich person and a poor person, they're both still people, they just have different leveling, or a different level of numbers, which are random symbols that we've made up, right, in their bank account. So one has $1 million in their bank account and the other one has 0, right? Well, that doesn't even exist. They're just numbers, or they're symbols that we've given value to that don't actually exist. But then also money is just like an idea, it's a concept, right? Clean versus dirty, these aren't necessarily opposites, because it's still one, like let's say there's a dirty, like a dirty, or a kid who's like dirty, and then a kid who's clean, right? Like they took a bath, whatever, they washed up with soap and stuff like that. That's just like a different state of well, and also like using those words too, like dirty and clean, there's like a negative connotation with like dirty and like a positive connotation with clean, which is also, well, it's just not true from a natural perspective. It's actually better to be dirty, but this is also like a part of like the brainwashing with like words, because like words technically don't exist, right? They're like symbols, and we've given them value with like sounds, and like we've learned that through the education system and all that, right? So then also another opposite maybe could be like old versus young, when in reality it's not the opposite. It's just like different stages a human being or any kind of living thing goes through in its life cycle, right? So it's not opposite, it's just on a different spectrum of it's just different stages that someone goes through. Because I was gonna kind of use the word time, but like time also doesn't exist. There's only like this moment right now, right? There's not like different phases of time, because time also uses numbers, which are, like, again, I said, are like man-made concept. They're like symbols that we've given meaning to, right? So these are just a couple examples. I'm trying to think if I have another one off the top of my head, but yeah, these things aren't opposite, they're just different points of like different stages of like different cycles. I guess if you want to say like summer versus winter, I know that's probably not something that, I mean, I feel like maybe people would be like, oh yeah, those are opposites, but they're just different points in like a whole cycle of the year, or whatever you want to call it. I don't even know how you would even like really break that down, but you can experience different seasons and stuff like that, right? So, but anyways, that's kind of like the gist of what I wanted to talk about with why duality doesn't exist, and more specifically talking about duality when it comes to opposites and how opposites don't exist. So I hope you guys can maybe understand that. I'm trying to think if talk about zero and infinity, because like I'm trying to think of like other opposites. Oh yeah, like white versus black, right? White versus black is like another one that people typically use for like opposites existing, but really I think they're not opposites, because one is like the reflection of all colors and the other one's is the absence of any of any colors, right? So they're not opposites, they just have like different variations, because there's like variations of like different colors too, right? So if you're saying like, I don't know, like I think blue and orange are on the opposites of the like color wheel or whatever, but there's like thousands and thousands of different variations in between, like it's an unlimited variation between the two, right? I think I also had one more point that I wanted to make talking about the white versus black. I think I kind of forgot. It's getting a little toasty out here. Maybe darkness versus like lightness, right? But really like lightness and darkness or brightness, whatever, it's just like darkness is the absence of light, which I think it's like literally impossible for that to be like absolute darkness. So there's not even like a point where you could have that. And then there's like not absolute lightness, right? Like there's no like I said with the colors, there's like a different variation between those states and everything, right? Like there's never like one absolute versus the other, and even if there was, it would just be on the same, it would be like one spectrum or whatever, where there's the different variations. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.